Hello and welcome to a new video where, as requested, I will be talking about 3 of the Yamaha Reface instruments, including the Yamaha DX, which I got right here, which is an FM synthesizer. In addition, I have the Yamaha Reface CS, which is a virtual analog synthesizer, and also the Yamaha CP, which is the electric piano keyboard in the Reface series. So the Reface are an interesting series. I don't have the organ combo keyboard, though I have played it and it's quite nice. So in some ways they are a very interesting and innovative group of synthesizers. They're introduced in 2015, and they caught the wave of the miniaturization of music equipment to make it maximally portable, and all of the keyboards are extremely light, well enough built that with a simple keyboard bag you can keep them quite safe. Put them in a keyboard bag, throw them in a backpack, and they're very happy. They also represent quite an interesting combination of a retro approach. So the CP looks at the classic retro pianos, both Yamaha pianos and Wurlitzer and Rose pianos, and some other features too. The CS harks back to the classic high-end Yamaha synths of the 70s, and represents a sort of dramatically simplified version of those. And the DX introduces a remarkably accessible FM synthesis. I'll be looking at the DX first, and I'll demonstrate briefly all 3 of them using a sequencer. None of them have onboard sequencers, so I'll be using a KeyStep Pro, and we'll look at, typically for my music equipment videos, for my favorite feature in each. Although because I'm introducing the series, I'll talk a little bit about what each keyboard does in general. So I hope you enjoy the video. Thanks for watching. So here is the Yamaha Reface DX. As I mentioned earlier, Yamaha got on board quite early on, 2015, with the miniaturization of instruments, the maximalization of portability, and the Yamaha Reface DX is very useful for chucking in a bag and taking into a live situation. It does have mini keys, which is not for everybody. You're not going to be playing Rachmaninoff on it. And of course you can use an external keyboard if you want access just to the sounds. For the way I use the instrument, the mini keyboard is fine, but I do use it with sequencers and other keyboards too. As you can see, I would add actually that the KEYBED is very, very nice, albeit a mini one. It's actually extremely nice to play. You just need to get used to the rather delicate movements you need to make. As you can see, I have it plugged into a hardware controller from D-Tronics, an excellent Dutch company that makes hardware controllers for digital synths that are difficult to program. Actually, in the case of the DX, everything I'm doing here is accessible from the front panel and not difficult to get to. But what the D-Tronics controller does is allow you to group the controls over different operators and different parts of the synthesizers. So it's very good for live use, for live tweaking. Everything is programmable from inside, and also there are some possibilities for live tweaking too from here, from the front panel. So, in order to demonstrate a little tiny bit about FM synthesis, I will play a sequence from the KeyStep Pro, which is just to the right of the DX. And you can hear it playing a sine tone from operator 1. What I'm going to do now is mix in operator 2. And what you will hear is that rather than having a parallel sine tone playing, maybe at a different pitch or some aspect like this, what it actually does is modulate operator 2. That's the heart of FM synthesis. So when you hear me introduce operator 2, the whole sound begins to change. Very briefly too, the DX does have an LFO which affects exclusively pitch or level, but given that one operator modulates another, it's much more than just a simple vibrato effect. So I'll just introduce a bit of the LFO here, so you can hear it's quite an interesting effect. We can speed up the LFO and then slow it down. Well, we could go on doing this forever, but that's just a very brief demonstration of how introducing level from each operator will affect the overall sound, and indeed how the LFO works. So there we have a third, and now a fourth operator. These can all be tuned and affected in various ways. They can be played at fixed frequencies, etc. The DX also introduced a feedback idea whereby the operators feedback on themselves, and their fundamental waveforms begin to change. So if I raise the level of the feedback, you'll begin to hear quite interesting and drastic changes. So very briefly, that's what I love about this synth. They found a practical way for you to get very quickly into the fundamentals of FM synthesis. So if I just stop the sequencer for a while here, for a moment here, and I go to one of the presets, dark bass, which is this classic FM bass sound, passing through a phaser, which is one of the built-in effects on the DX. Then we can see something really quite interesting when we start to use the feedback effect. So I will just start playing the sequencer again. And we hear that nice phasing effect. And I'll start to add different layers of sequencer. The KeyStep Pro has 4 lanes of sequencer. The DX has 8 voices of polyphony, so it's quite able to handle 4 independent sequences. So you can hear the texture thickening up a bit. And I'll just transpose up an octave to make things a bit clearer. So now we have quite a complex contrapuntal texture. I think FM synthesis is extremely good at handling this kind of material with these very plucky sounds. I'm going to add feedback to the first 3 operators. The reason I'm not doing it with the 4th is the 4th already has some feedback which adds to this plucky sound within the patch. So I'm going to go for this triangle wave, sawtooth wave feedback. So the waves, the sine waves of the first 3 operators are moving from pure sine waves towards sawtooth. And this has an effect not unlike a filter actually, as it adds more and more upper partial information. And very typically for FM, it can get quite harsh and quite noisy, percussive. The range is huge, as you can hear. So what was quite melodic, quite contrapuntal material becomes much more of just a noise texture. And I'll do the same here for the feedback that's moving towards the square wave. So again, you hear this transformation. And here it almost disintegrates and has the phaser working over time. As I said, the phaser is one of the built-in effects for the DX. So yeah, that's just a brief demonstration of the Yamaha Reface DX, and the feature I like most, how quickly you get into the fundamentals of FM synthesis. It has very powerful 8-stage envelope, which is to say you have what they call envelope generator rate, which is the shape of the envelope, and level, which is the intensity with which the envelope is applied to the shape of the sound. And the combination of the two can produce a remarkably wide variety of effects, but that's another video. Yes, so you can pick one of these up for less than €300. I think it's a fantastic way to have a look at the fundamentals of FM synthesis. Thank you very much. So now we're looking at the Yamaha Reface CS. And as I mentioned before, it name checks the classic high-end Yamaha, legendary Yamaha CS series from the 70s, made famous by Vangelis, among others. Of course, it's a much more modest synthesizer than any of those. And it's a remarkable combination of simplicity and flexibility. So it has one oscillator, but with 5 drastically different oscillator types. And it has a very interesting approach to modulation. So it has an LFO, which can go from very subtle to quite drastic effects, but also the each oscillator type has something called texture and something called mod, both of which add a great deal of texture and information to the oscillators. So the first position oscillator, which will be going through the filter here, so we'll leave the filter open for now, and also the envelope, which has a fascinating combination of filter envelope and amp envelope, and you can mix in between, again with very interesting results. It has an effect stage, which, to be honest with you, I don't use very much. I think the effects are slightly dated, but are not uninteresting in themselves, but I prefer to use external effects. What I want to show you about this, what I like about it, are these very long, if we just open the amp envelope and we can start to play. Already in a 70s sci-fi world, and I begin to add a little modulation to this saw wave, which helps it start to become more super saw-like. And then if I add texture, we begin to get a lovely sub-oscillator. So it lends itself obviously very naturally to those sorts of ambient soundscapes, and that's with the filter open. Nick Batt, when reviewing this synth, famously called it a sweet spot synth, and indeed it is. For all that the switches on the front are quite small, and they could do with being bigger, you can find nice little notches in them. So yeah, like I said, we have that super saw sound. Again, the KEYBED, although mini, is extremely nice to play. You might think of it as the best first synth ever made. I can't imagine a better introduction to synthesis of the classic subtractive kind. So there you have the saw and super saw. I won't go into detail into the others, but if I just flick through them, you'll see quite how the different sound worlds we get into. From FM synth to different sorts of phasing. But what I just wanted to look at when we go back to the super saw, if I just filter off and then start to add a bit more LFO. You can also modulate the oscillators textures, I think, with great effect. So what I think I like best about it is the combination of the LFO's modulation and the oscillator's own texture and mod. So like I say, from quite subtle to extreme quite quickly. And for something that will cost you less than €300 that you can chuck into the back of a backpack, I think it has a pretty good sound. So that is the Yamaha Reface CS. Okay, and now the last but very much not least of the Yamaha Reface keyboards I've been looking at in today's video, the mighty CP. This is Yamaha's Reface electric piano. We just had a look at the CS, which, among other things, is an absolute joy to improvise with. And that's a very important part of my work as a musician and my work in the theatre. The CP is also wonderful for this, and I've used it in many theatre soundtracks to add just a little very pointed, accurate kind of sound. So, in some ways, it's an elaborate piano sound box, but it is a real instrument. It has the Reface KEYBED, which, although, like mentioned with the others, is mini, is actually extremely nice to play. So you have 6 different sounds. You have Rode Type 1. Which, yeah, you can hear it responds very well to velocity and so on. You have 128 notes of polyphony, so it's a piano for sure. Then you have the Rhodes Type 2. So that's quite raspy because I have the drive up. You can turn the drive down. And there's still actually a bit of distortion. Down the bottom there. Then we have what's probably my favourite, or the one that's most to my taste, is the Fabulous Wurlitzer. If you want to use a MIDI controller or indeed a properly weighted keyboard, it responds extremely well to that too. So then you have a clavinet, a very interesting toy piano, which of course has the classic 1 octave, but then can go much higher, which I've never seen a toy piano being able to do, but in theory it could, I suppose. And it gets very interesting down at the bottom. And you can hear how beautifully sampled it is. Then you have a classic Yamaha piano. For that stereo 80s sound. There is a drive circuit, which we already saw in action, which drives rather than distorts, depending on which piano you're using. It has a more drastic effect on some rather than others. So in high settings on the Wurlitzer, it is almost distorted. Of course, used in conjunction with velocity. But what I think is really fantastic about this keyboard is the delay. All of the effects are extremely good. So, for instance, the auto wah on the clavinet is pretty great. You have a tremolo that works pretty well on all of them. You have nice big chorus. Phaser. All of which are very, very usable. You have a reverb with just one dial-in button called depth, but actually the reverb changes quite a lot with it. But where things get very interesting, I think, is the delay. So you have an analog delay, which is, nice enough. Especially with the drive, actually. To be honest with you, rather than this analog delay, I would put it through my Moog Minifuga delay. But the digital delay is something very, very wonderful. So if you put it at extreme settings, you get an absolutely crystal clear repetition that dies away very, very slowly. So over a really, really wide arch. This is extremely useful. Lots of fun to be had there. And you can drive it to quite extreme places too. Also, if you put it in the minimum position for time, you get these very, very interesting slightly ring modulatory effects, which with the toy piano are really great. So that is the Yamaha Reface CP, a great little miniature electric piano with a fabulous digital delay. So, hope you've enjoyed the video introducing 3 of the 4 Yamaha Reface keyboards, which are all available for a very, very reasonable amount of money. I can heartily recommend all of them to you. I have got tremendous use out of all of them over the years. So, please remember to like and subscribe, and thank you very much for watching.